So thank you very much for joining and being here today for this webinar about DEI and culture trends in 2025. I thought this was a great opportunity for us to come just over halfway through the year, to come take stock of some things that have been going on in 2025 and also look forward to the future. So reflect a little bit, look forward to what's been going on, and also raise our questions, have some dialogue on that. Some of you have already sent me over some questions, which I will be talking about later on during the broadcast, and I'm looking forward to that. As well, if you're joining live, then please feel free to drop any questions that you have into the comments, and I'll see how many I can get to in the time that we have today together. So I'm Tamara Makoni. Some of you may already know me and have been to one of my webinars or another event before, met me in person. If so, great to see you again. If not, and we're meeting for the first time, then thanks for coming and great to make your acquaintance. I'm Tamara Makoni, and I'm an inclusion and culture specialist, the CEO of Kazuri Consulting. So I work with companies, many different companies in different industry sectors, mainly international companies, to translate insights about inclusion and culture into strategies that empower people from all walks of life and all backgrounds within the organization, and also, most importantly, to achieve strategic objectives. So really seeing how we can create better societies, better well-being, those kinds of objectives, as well as things like better performance, moving into new markets, and see how to empower people in order to do that. My work is very interesting in different areas. It covers advisory and consulting, workshop facilitation, guest lecturing at universities. Also, I am an author. So earlier this year, I brought out a book called Women, Intersectionality and Europe, which is about identity and looking at how to also build inclusive societies based on understanding the nuances of who we are, our identities, and the lived experiences that we have. So here's an outline for today's webinar. I'll take the first part to be talking about some global trends that are going on and also trends that we're seeing in Europe at the moment, focusing mainly on what's happening in the corporate sphere and talking about how the corporate DEI landscape has evolved in 2025 in terms of trends, etc. Then I'll directly answer the questions that you have sent over. And also, if you have live comments, then feel free to add those in and I will answer them as we go through. All set? Then again, thanks for joining and let's dive in. So thinking first of all about the global DEI landscape, what is going on there? I imagine if you've been reading the news this year, looking at media broadcasts, etc., then you'll have seen that DE&I has been under attack for a while, but particularly this year, it feels like we are seeing a lot of backlash and resistance, an unprecedented level in some cases, and different ways in which this is happening. So some violent resistance and backlash going on in the world as part of the global landscape. Yes, that is a key part of the story, but that is not all of the story. So I wanted to share some insights that add some more nuance to what is going on. Because looking at the literature, the research out there, and also my experiences as a consultant working in this field, then yes, there is some strong resistance and backlash and attempts to really rewind DE&I, erase it in some ways, in some parts of the world, particularly in the US. But we are also seeing that DE&I is, as some experts are saying, thriving in other parts of the world. So one of the key messages looking at the landscape is that, yes, DE&I is under attack in some parts of the world, but it is thriving and doing well and being well supported in other parts of the world. So I'm going to bring some insights from different parts of the world to back up this claim. So first of all, the experts, when they're looking into this, are seeing that companies who are still investing in DE&I and looking to keep on using this to further their objectives, to empower their people, to cause well-being, all of those very positive things, are doing so and are refusing to submit to backlash and really go with the tide that we're seeing in other parts of the world against DE&I, because these companies believe that it is still essential to innovation. They understand the value of this. They know it is essential to innovation, first of all, to workforce resilience, seeing DE&I and inclusive cultures as a way to empower people in terms of well-being, make sure that there is equity and fairness in organizations, and create society where we are all valued, seen, welcomed, we belong, all of those very important things. So workforce resilience is the second one after innovation, and also international growth. So the world is getting more and more globalized. We're not seeing a reverse on this, even though there are some dynamics, which I will talk about later on in the webinar, but we're seeing that globalization is still the watchword of the day. Companies need to be internationally minded, and key to helping them expand into new markets and also maintain their status in the markets where they already are, and work with people from across different cultures, across different backgrounds, different nationalities, or the broad spectrum of diversity, is making sure that there is inclusive cultures, that there is equity, that we are valuing diversity. So DE&I is still thriving in many parts of the world, and these are the three reasons why companies are saying this is why it is still essential: innovation, workforce resilience, and international growth. Now, looking at some regions around the world, I want to share some examples of how we are still seeing DE&I initiatives creating systemic change and moving in that direction. So looking at Asia, first of all, thinking about Japan. They have expanded the disclosure rules for organizations in Japan recently, meaning that companies who are of a specific size must, by law, report on workforce diversity. At the moment, this is mainly focused on gender diversity, but it's a great start thinking about how to create systemic measurement and think about to create systemic change in this market. So thinking about how companies must report on workplace diversity in terms of metrics. So percentage of women in manager roles, for instance, looking at the gender pay gap, and also looking at men as part of the very important equation for gender equality. For instance, how many male employees in Japanese enterprises are taking up parental leave opportunities, and looking at how to equalize society in that way and create the social benefits that we know can come from DE&I initiatives and measuring these things. Very importantly, to make sure that it's not just about signposting and performative actions, companies must demonstrate that they have an action plan. So really showing they have thought about this, they are going to take these strategic steps to embed it into what they are doing, and then measure what they are doing on a regular basis, report back so that we have that accountability and we can see the progress that we want to achieve. We have the steps for getting there. So that's an example of something that is happening in Japan, looking at the global trends in Asia. If we look to South America, Brazil gives a good example of, again, systemic changes that have a DE&I focus. Similar to the AI Act in the European Union, which came into effect recently, Brazil is planning, or it's expected next year, to go into force an AI law that does basically the same thing that the EU AI Act does. So making sure that there's ethical and responsible use of AI. It's not enough for organizations just to create systems that use AI and, harms may happen, but whatever. They need to make sure that their AI that is being produced works in ethical and responsible ways and is not creating harm to people. So an example, again, from South America, looking at how DEI principles are being embedded in systemic ways to keep this moving forward. If we turn our attention now to Europe, then for sure, one of the things that we are seeing, and I've been reading a lot in the media about this in recent months, is resistance to the US attempts, in one example, to US attempts to stop DEI initiatives, or to use influence, should I say, to stop companies in other countries outside of the US implementing DE&I and continuing to progress that in the work that they are doing. So earlier this year, there was a lot of reports in the media that the US had been sending emails, letters out to foreign enterprises discussing this and asking them to make changes. And there was a great example that we saw from Sweden of a reaction to this and the resistance putting the foot down and saying, no, this is not happening. So in Sweden, there were reports in May that the Stockholm city government received an email from the US embassy in Stockholm asking that officials make sure that any contractors who work with the embassy do not implement DE&I in their practices. So basically, whoever the Stockholm city government is working with is not contracting with people who are doing things to do with DE&I and are not supporting this as part of the work that the Stockholm city government is doing in that sense. So the officials took a look at this and robustly turned around and said, no, we're not signing this document you wanted to sign saying that we will align with this principle. And here's a quote from one of the officials in the administration there in Stockholm. They said, no, because diversity, equality, and inclusion are values that we strive for and stand up for in Stockholm. So end of discussion. This is against our democratic values. It is against what we stand for. And so You cannot use your influence to get us to go against what we believe in. End of discussion. So a great example there of how we are seeing the dynamics in the global sense of resistance in some areas, thriving in others around the world, and also resistance to the resistance, in a sense. And definitely around this time, there were many reports about European officials and also leaders in European organizations who were also speaking out and saying the same thing. No, we value DE&I. We have it for a reason. We believe that it will be a strategic enabler in our organizations and society. So we are not going to respond to your request that we remove these programs and roll back the initiatives, reverse their effects. End of story. So some information there about Europe and other regions showing what is going on around DE&I. So now, if we look at what is going on in Europe and come to some trends there, then I want to focus first of all on the regulatory landscape and how this is impacting what is going on in corporations around Europe. So one thing that is going on, if we look at the United Kingdom, is that they have some very robust laws and rules right there at the moment that have been in place since 2017 around pay gap reporting. So every year since 2017, it has been mandatory for companies in the United Kingdom of 250 employees or more in different sectors to report on the pay gap between men and women employed in the organization. This has been going on. It's transparent, so you can really Google organizations and just find their reports there, read through, see how the organization is doing, see the year-on-year progress. So there's great value to making this information available to everybody to see and bringing in accountability measures in this way so that organizations need to prove that they are doing something and following up their claims with action to close the gaps. In the UK, there is currently consultation going on with a view to bringing in laws around disability and ethnicity pay gap reporting as well, so that in organizations, we're not only going to measure the gender pay gap, but also looking at people who have disabilities and people who do not have disabilities and seeing what the gaps are in pay there, because we understand that there are gaps and there is inequity in terms of employment opportunities between people with disabilities and people who do not have disabilities. Also, looking at the fact that there are ethnicity pay gaps that have been reported very widely, that people are not all paid the same for doing the same work and part of the reason for this is due to ethnic background and racial discrimination. So legislation currently being looked at, expected to pass in maybe 2027, come into effect, to look at disability pay gaps and also ethnicity pay gaps, expanding on the legislation that's been there since 2017, looking at gender pay gap. So a great, robust example of something happening here in Europe that is going against this tide of what might look like global resistance against DEI. So again, recognizing the value, moving things forward. So that is a key piece of legislation that organizations in the UK have to be aware of, reporting on the gender pay gap. And then as more changes like this come in place, they will have to take this into consideration and make sure they are complying by the rules to keep on reporting on disability pay gaps, ethnicity pay gaps, etc. There are also other laws that are underway in the UK around menopause, for instance. So looking at older people in the workforce going through menopause, particularly older women, and looking at the impact that this has, making sure that there are protections and support for people going through menopause in the workplace so that we no longer have as many people feeling that they need to resign from their job because they are dealing with menopause symptoms, for instance, because there has been studies showing that this is the case, that women feel that they are not able to speak up about menopause in the workplace and the symptoms that they are having, and that they feel that sometimes they are pushed out of their jobs, they voluntarily resign because they cannot manage dealing with the symptoms in a supportive workforce. So making sure that workforces are more inclusive and take into account what older women and people who are going through the menopause are experiencing. So this is something, again, that is going through government consultation and is expected to come into a force in terms of real legislation very soon. Organizations are required to make sure they have action plans. So again, similar to what we saw in Japan, make sure that they have action plans. So it's not just talk and performative actions. They show there's a strategy, they report on things that are going on, they put things in place to move the needle in the direction that we want to see it. Looking at the European Union now, I mentioned earlier the AI Act, similar to what Brazil is doing. That came into effect recently. There are other pieces of legislation and directives at EU level that also support DE&I. Things like the Pay Transparency Directive, again, looking at the gaps that people are paid based on their identity for doing the same work, gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gap, etc., and making sure that there are rules around how companies have to be transparent about what they are paying people and why they are paying people different things in the event that that happens. So that is something, again, that will be coming in. The Women on Boards Directive, again, piece of legislation that have come in recently or will soon be coming into effect, moving the needle in the direction around DE&I principles of equity, equality, and fairness in society. I wanted to deep dive a little bit into another one, the EAA, or the European Accessibility Act, which came into effect this year, and again, is very important for companies to be aware of and to think about. So under the European Accessibility Act, companies have to design products and services with universal accessibility in mind. In other words, universal design, making sure it is accessible for all of their consumers, not just some consumers, and making sure, of course, that this benefits everybody, but in particular, it benefits people with disabilities and elderly people. It's not okay for products and services by companies in the European market to only serve certain populations and not be suitable for everybody to use in an accessible manner. And one thing definitely to note about this around accountability, again, is the fact that within this directive, then there are penalties for non-compliance. So companies need to be very much aware that this isn't a nice to have, and if I don't do anything, nothing will happen. They need to be very aware that there are strong penalties baked into this legislation for non-compliance. And these can range from fines to suspension of products and services, removal from markets and exclusion from markets. So being told for a year, for instance, that you can't sell your products and services within the EU marketplace, and even criminal charges and imprisonment, depending on the circumstances. So again, very important measures there to make sure that there is this ethos that we want to see going on and moving forward around DE&I. So again, examples of how, yes, there is backlash in some parts of the globe, particularly the US, but in other parts of the world, we are seeing that D&I is thriving in a sense. It is important to mention while talking about the EU legislation that this is what we are seeing now. We will see what happens in the years to come based on the changes that we saw last year in the European Parliament composition, also the new Commission coming in. So again, Europe is not a utopia right now when it comes to DE&I. There are things happening in our society that mean that we will see what happens. The situation is bound to evolve and we will see exactly what happens. But right now, these are things that are in place, helping to provide protections and structure at systemic level for DE&I that companies need to very much be aware of and that impact the work that they are doing. And yes, talking about how Europe is not the utopia in a sense, then you might be wondering when I'm talking about all of these things, these positive things, how that is aligning with what is going on in organizations. Some things that you might be seeing in the work that you are doing, in anecdotal conversations you're having with people, in media articles you're reading, for instance, seeing things like that there are lower budgets being assigned to DE&I projects right now, that DEI teams in some companies are quietly being dissolved, personnel absorbed into other departments, things like this. How does all of this align with what I'm saying about DEI is thriving and going on? So I want to talk about this and share some insights from my own work and from others I've spoken to, from case research that I've done, etc., to give some perspective on this. So the first thing that I definitely want to talk about is that the work is still going on. I talked earlier, just a minute ago, about EU legislations. So there is still very much a need for focusing on DE&I, for having these values and principles in the work that we are doing. And we can't just do away with it. Particularly if a company wants to stay on the right side of the law, they can't just do away with it. The work is still going on. But at the same time, there is less of it in some senses, and how it looks is changing. So I want to spend a few moments just talking about that and some of the things that I am seeing and experiencing. A headline point around this is that we are seeing less performative action around DEI. And this goes some way to why we are seeing a little bit less visibility for DE&I and less DEI work being done. But if we look at the quality of the work, then we can see different picture there, different nuances. But we are definitely seeing less performative work. So what I mean by this is we're seeing fewer glitzy International Women's Day celebrations, for instance. Fewer companies who during June and Pride Month will add the Pride flag to their logo. Fewer things like this that in some ways give the impression that DE&I work is being done and give it visibility, which is good, but often that might be the one or the few things that they do, and they're not actually following up with systemic work or the actions that are needed to create the change that will really move the needle in the organizations and in society. So we're seeing less of that, for sure. But the work is still continuing. And from what I'm seeing, there is more actual quality in the work that is being done. So that's a bonus, in my view. If you look at my own clients, for instance, and the requests that I'm getting, the type of work that I'm being asked to do, then there's a lot less interest this year in event keynotes, for instance. So things like International Women's Day, there was a lot less interest in wanting to have a speaker come and just give a one-off talk about that and celebrate the day, and then that's where the relationship ends. Now it's more about crafting programs with people, and I'm seeing more requests, or I'd say a steady amount of requests as before, of people looking at long-term strategy. So maybe having an International Women's Day event, but that is part of a wider initiative. It isn't just a one-off performative gesture. So looking at long-term strategy, inclusive culture building as well, and other specific objectives like that. And culture in particular is something that I'm seeing as a big driving trend coming out, and something that I'm incorporating more and more into the work that I'm doing, as I'll talk about in a little bit. So if you look around at companies in Europe, there are still many companies out there who are proudly talking about DEI on their websites. They have not removed it from there, and they are also talking about it in their marketing whenever they're still going to events, still talking about it, etc. There are also still DE&I jobs being advertised in Europe, still DE&I teams. So there's definitely still work going on there. The sector is still alive, but I feel that there is less noise. And as I said, the quality of work that is being done feels better because we've gotten rid to quite some extent of the performative actions, and companies who perhaps were doing it more because it was fashionable than because it was actually part of their strategy and really something that they believed in. So moving on to this point that I'm mentioning about seeing DE&I on company websites, we are still seeing that. Yes, we are also seeing companies who are working in DE&I, but some of the language and terminology is changing. So there has been some suppression of language. Directives, for instance, in companies, I've been hearing about people being told that we are no longer using this word or that word. We're now going to frame it in this way, and maybe use more euphemistic terms that are less inviting of backlash, essentially, looking at what is going on, particularly globally, around words like equity, around even saying inclusion, for instance. So looking at how to avoid backlash and walk a tightrope, balance it with still wanting to do the work, but making sure that we try to invite as little backlash as possible. In some companies, then yes, there is that performative element. And so there was the case of there might be backlash. Let's stop using these words. Let's redirect. And as I said, that can be indicative of perhaps not having the most noble aims around DE&I in the first place, and it more being a fashion trend. However, in my experience, this is not always the case. There is the reality that business is international, and the US remains a key player in many organizations' outlook. And also, it's not just the US. There are other countries out there, other markets, where we are seeing a lot of backlash, a lot of tension. So it is very important for businesses to balance all of these things. And I've seen that in some ways, this suppression of language or directives about this terminology, not that one, is a way of grappling with how to keep doing the work and keeping those values, keeping the principles, but also figure out as you go, try to minimize backlash and see how to move forward. So there are these different dynamics at play. It is not entirely black and white, but this is definitely something that we are seeing in the European corporate landscape. And connected with this is another dynamic around more of a local focus rather than international focus, and also a rise in nationalist rhetoric. I'm sure any of us who's familiar with European politics, the European landscape, will be able to see that this is something that we are seeing. more and more nationalist rhetoric coming out, I'd say globally as well, but yes, here in Europe, in our communities, in our societies at national level, etc., and also more of a local focus. There is heightened fear, I would say, in many countries, many societies, and concern about survival and protection. And this is one dynamic that experts are saying is driving some of this rise in local focus, hunkering down, looking at how does this affect me? How do I protect my interests? What's in it for me? Seeing a lot of that, and also a rise in nationalist rhetoric. So definitely looking at people's field of interest narrowing in some respects due to thoughts about survival and protection and concerns about fear and safety and competition as well. On the other hand, I think it's very interesting looking at this trend about local focus, and companies are looking at this from the angle of they are international, yes, but they have local hubs. So offices in different countries, for instance, they have teams working in different locations. So they have to be mindful of both international and local dynamics. And I find it's very interesting how I'm seeing companies pay more attention to region-specific initiatives that look at local laws, specific cultural nuances as well, and what community needs are in local locations, more than perhaps in previous years, taking into account the heightened need for this because what is going on, but I think also bringing in benefit because yes, you need to have a joined up strategy at high level, but the end game of DE&I is to make sure that lived experiences benefit from this, that we are seeing more equal societies, more equal communities, and what is needed in one community and one employee population will not be the same as in another one all the time. One size doesn't fit all. So I think that there is a benefit of this and how we're seeing some of the work evolve to looking at more region-specific initiatives, more initiatives that take local needs and considerations into account in order to ride this through and make sure that we can still keep doing the work effectively. And again, that's increasingly why I'm thinking about culture as part of my work, seeing more requests about this and incorporating it in. It's always been very important as a component of inclusion and building inclusive cultures, getting equity, but now more than ever, it's really important to understand these cultural nuances and what is going on in different regions to make sure that we can get what we want in terms of the objectives of bringing well-being and seeing the change that we want to see. It feels more urgent than ever in some respects. Okay, so there you have my thoughts about the global DE&I landscape and also thinking about what is going on in Europe right now, looking at legislation, looking at systemic changes, looking at what's going on inside organizations, again, focusing mainly on corporate DE&I measures, suppression of language, looking at more local focus and culture becoming even more something important to think about. So I'm going to pause there and start addressing some of the specific questions that have already been sent to me. And I already see some comments, so that is great. So I'm going to start focusing now, shifting attention to your thoughts, your comments, and addressing some specific thoughts coming through. And thank you very much for your feedback right now. Just gonna flash up some comments we're seeing on stage, seeing on screen here. So thank you very much. Really interesting to know that this resonates with you. Okay, so now looking at some questions that have been coming through. So first one, somebody emailed me a little while ago and was asking, are there still jobs in DE&I? So yes, to reiterate, there are still jobs. Yes, there are still organizations that have DE&I teams that are working on this, that are putting focus on this, that are investing in this area. And so if you want, for instance, to know exactly what I'm speaking about when I say there are jobs, feel free to send me a message. I can share you links to forums that I go through looking at global trends, etc. And I can see that there are jobs being advertised there. So very happy to share that information. Let me know if you'd like to see that. Also, in other forums I look at, for instance, getting weekly newsletters that show consultancy opportunities, volunteering opportunities, employment positions, then there are jobs specific for people working in DEI sectors like DEI managers, DEI directors, but also in the broader ecosystem, I would say, around supporting DE&I principles of working to create better, more equal societies and organizations. So yes, there are still jobs in DE&I right now, and there is still investment in that area. Another question was, what are my clients asking for right now? I already answered this in a little bit of detail before, talking about how I'm definitely seeing culture come up as something that more people are asking about, particularly with reference to what is going on, balancing national and group priorities with, or let's say, international priorities with local priorities, and making sure that we understand what the needs of different communities are and how to bridge gaps. That's definitely something that I'm seeing a lot coming up at the moment. Also, as mentioned, seeing fewer things like performative one-off things, having more conversations with people about, yes, I want to have a keynote, but how are we going to make sure it's not a one-off? How do we make sure it is followed up with other initiatives? We build out a nice program, we work together, we measure what is going on with KPIs, etc., so that we get the results that we need to see. A lot more interest and uptake about initiatives like that. So that's great to see. A question here specific about NGOs. So I mentioned that, yes, a lot of my insights are more about the corporate DEI field, but I do work with NGOs as well and associations. And it was very interesting to get this question specifically around NGOs and what is going on. So this person was asking, what are the potential risks and opportunities for rolling back DEI commitments in NGOs in light of the current funding climate? And I think, yes, it's definitely a question coming from NGOs, particularly with looking at the funding side of things. But I think it's relevant for people, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what type of organization, private company, public company, etc. Very interesting right now, thinking about the global dynamics, particularly the backlash. What are the opportunities and risks here? So first of all, I'll start with the opportunities. I definitely see at least some short-term opportunities in terms of protecting oneself, thinking if there is backlash going on, and we're hearing that that equity is something that is no longer something we can talk about, then okay, short-term, try to protect ourselves in the moment, then let's cycle away from this, reverse what we've been doing, maybe not talk about it anymore, maybe stop doing the work completely, because that is a way of keeping ourselves safe and preserving the work that we are doing. Because for NGOs, for instance, doing very important work in society. And so there's a sense of how do we keep going and make sure that we're still seeing that societal benefit in the midst of everything that's going on. So yes, I understand that cycling back what's going on in DE&I, reversing things, rolling back changes perhaps can appear as an appealing way to deal with what is going on. I totally understand that. And thinking about what is going on, what we're seeing, sometimes at systemic level with pushbacks against DE&I, then yeah, it probably, at least in the short term, could result in almost like a stay of execution, providing some short-term relief and not being a direct target, for instance. If people are, and as we have seen, some organizations have been targeted for the stance that they have taken around, we believe in D&I and we will keep talking about it, we will keep on rolling out programs, etc. So yes, I see a clear opportunity there in terms of protection. However, I really see more risks than protection, for sure. Because I'm assuming that the work that was done in DE&I was done for a reason. It wasn't just because it was fashionable or done on a whim or, oh, woke up one morning and decided to work on DE&I. No. So if it was done for a reason, then it most likely had you believe that it would help you in terms of your strategic benefits, what you want to see today, in the future, your long-term vision. So then now, if you are rolling back these things, then I would say you need to really make sure you're rolling back these things because you now feel that it supports your long-term vision and it will give you the strategic benefits, even better than the benefits you believed it would give you when you started working on this. Because if not, then you are really putting your long-term business in jeopardy for potential short-term gain. And I do say potential because I've definitely heard anecdotal accounts of businesses who have continued to be targeted or found themselves targeted in different ways, despite trying to protect themselves by rolling back what they're doing on DE&I, changing the wording they're using, etc. So it's not a surefire win that if we change and we roll this back, then that will equal protection. So you'll have potential short-term gain, but if you're rolling back changes that were fueling your long-term strategy, you will not see those long-term benefits when you roll these back. So that is a huge risk to the impact that you want to see in society today and in the years to come. I do recognize that without money, you can't continue. So that is an important part of this equation, thinking about funding sources and balancing that. It is a delicate balancing act that needs to be done, but it needs to be a balance for sure. And again, thinking about long-term objectives and achieving those versus potential short-term gain. Trust also has to be mentioned as part of this, in terms of your internal stakeholders, people in the organization, and also external stakeholders. DE&I is something that is very important to us as humans. It touches on our humanity. It is about our well-being, who we are, acceptance of all the different identities, diversity, making sure that we all feel that we are valued, seen, that we belong. That is what DE&I is about. It isn't some nice to have, it's something very, very important that matters to all of us as individuals and matters for communities. So if yesterday DE&I was something that was strategic for you, we're talking about this, yay, let's go forward, and now all of a sudden we're not talking about it, it goes away, that will create shockwaves. That will create a huge loss of trust and really erode any work that you have done until now, showing people internally that you care about their well-being, and also external stakeholders that this is what we believe in as an NGO, as an organization. So very, very important thing to think about. Credibility for the work that you're doing and for who you are as an organization and taking care of your people. Again, DE&I is not just some nice to have, it is something that is fundamental. It touches upon concepts that are core to who we are and our humanity as people. So again, yes, there might be some opportunities, potential things there, but be very mindful about those risks. And in my opinion, and in my experience, these are pretty glaring risks. So find a balance, of course, but bear all of this in mind. Just going to go, okay. So now I see some more comments coming through. Thanks again for your thoughts here. Okay. So now a question from Karen coming through. I feel resistance in the organization has helped me to use different, more comprehensible language to talk about DE&I. The intention is not to hide initiatives, but to be more approachable to our workforce and blue-collar workforce. Can you share your experience with translating DEI terminology? Perfect. Thank you for asking this. Really interesting to hear your insights and some things that are key to the work that you are doing. And I would say, yes, I fully agree. As I mentioned earlier about what we're seeing with language and some suppression of terminology, some changes in let's call it this rather than that. Yes, there is, in some instances, it is about performative work being done. And so it's no longer fashionable. Okay, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's change what we're doing. Let's rebrand. But that is not always the case. In some ways, this has been a very useful push to make sure that we are making sure that we are relatable in what we're saying. And we're showing people exactly what these things are and how fundamental it is to all of our lives here in organizations in Europe, etc. And so some experience of mine about translating the terminology. Then one thing that comes to mind is actually, yeah, something that I enjoy doing has come up in a few places. I'll highlight two of these places in some of the work I've done, is using analogies or using everyday examples to talk about fundamentally what is going on and how to make it really relatable in that way. So not over intellectualizing things, trying to use very simple everyday examples that embody what we're talking about when we talk about equity, for instance, when we talk about inclusion, what inclusion means. So I remember a few years ago, I did a video for International Women's Day looking at the difference between equity and equality. And I used the example of apples and bananas. So if you're going to be with two children, looking after two children, and they want to have a snack, you go to pick up a piece of fruit and you give two children an apple. And then I gave the example of how that would be equality because you're giving both children the exact same thing. But you recognize that one of the children is allergic to apples. So instead of giving them an apple, you give them a banana. So in that way, you're still treating both children fairly because they both have something to satisfy their hunger. But in the previous example of equality, then both of them could not actually satisfy their hunger. On the surface, you had equality, everyone has something, but when you look at it, they don't have equity because only one child can actually use the product they're given and eat the apple without being ill. So using examples like that, using stories and quite simple ways of explaining what these things are to And it's not about dumbing down or anything like that. It's just about making it relatable, helping to understand, helping to put it into everyday terms. Because I think that one of the traps that we can fall into for those of us who work in DE&I day in, day out, I think it's probably, if you work in any field day in, day out, you can be so used to reading all the literature, to talking about this all the time and talking to other people who are as immersed in it as you are, we can forget that not everybody spends 8 hours a day talking about DE&I and going to DE&I conferences, etc. So it's very important, particularly for something like DE&I, where it's about all of us collaborating and moving society together, that all of us have a chance to find information that's relatable to us when it comes to the terminology we're using, for instance. And so I remember as well, I've written articles and again used very simple analogies of things like learning to ride a bicycle for how we build trust, learning to drive a car for how we have commitments to our inclusive aims and set goals for ourselves, make sure that we measure them and follow up on them, things like this. And with my book, Women, Intersectionality and Europe, one of the key drivers behind that was finding European data, again, to make these concepts of intersectionality, diversity, equity, inclusion, equality, to make them relatable to European audiences. Because I was getting questions, very valid questions, from clients saying, how relatable and how valid are these concepts like intersectionality to us in Europe? Because all the books talking about this, all the case studies are from the US. This terminology was invented in the US. The term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the US, and it came out of the US legal context. So is it actually relatable for us? So by bringing together case studies, testimonies from women, data from European sources about organizations, international levels, EU level, etc., then trying to find that way of translating the terminology, making it relatable so that we can see ourselves reflected back and understand it in that intimate level. So thanks for asking the question, and those are some thoughts from me about how that can be done. Okay, so now I'm going to go to another question that I had in about dealing with polarity and political feeling in an inclusive way and in organizations. This is definitely a question I've been asked before, and I hear discussions about, thinking about how organizations are places of business. Do politics belong in the workplace? How can we maybe stop it from coming in? How do we deal with it when it comes in? What should we do? And when it is there, how do we deal with it in an inclusive way? So great that somebody sent over this question. I'm very happy to talk more about this. Yes, I can understand in some ways the thought that this is a business, politics don't belong here, but we are people. People work in businesses. We bring our whole selves to the office. And that is part of DE&I, wanting to be able to be who we are and be respected, be valued, be seen for who we are in the workplace. That is not to say that we're allowed to harm each other and call each other names, be particularly offensive, anything like that. Not at all. We have to be respectful, but we have to be able to know that there is a place for each of us, mindful of the fact that we have different belief systems. There will be different religions in the workplace. There will be people who speak different languages. There will be people with different backgrounds, different sexual orientations, different genders, different political views. It's all part of our identity and who we are. I can't go to see a client and leave my political beliefs behind, away from who I am, because they are part of me. And the same with the people that I'm meeting when I go to visit the client. So it's a nice idea to think we can leave that outside, but it is part of who we are. But at the same time, we do have to be respectful and make sure that there is space for all of us to have our opinions, but that we're not imposing our opinions on other people. For instance, we're being respectful of the plurality of views, all the things like that. Very important. There is a lot of polarity that we're seeing in society. By some accounts, increasing polarity. We're seeing that in organizations with respect to DE&I. I see that in terms of resistance coming up to the work that I'm doing. Clients talk to me about this, and again, talking about things like the rise in local viewpoints and local considerations that I talked about, looking at the European DEI trends. So how to deal with this? I might sound like a broken record, but I will say something I've said many times before. In my experience, dialogue, making sure there is space for dialogue and to hear and understand each other, is a great way to approach this and a great foundation to set in, making sure that people see that we can have different things that we believe and that we understand, And we're never all going to agree on the same thing, ever. That's just how it works, people. We're never all going to agree and rely on the same thing. But there is space for different opinions. There is not space for us to offend each other and to do anything harmful like that, but there is space for different opinions and for us to be who we are, mindful that there are those different things. And also, one key tool for fighting polarity is showing that we have more in common than we might think otherwise. A tool of polarity is removing nuance from discussions and arguments and seeing that it's either this or it's that. It's all very black and white. When we have dialogues, we see that shared humanity, and we see that the world is not like that. For better, for worse, the world is not just black and white. There are all sorts of nuances, and that's what brings the beauty, in my opinion. So by creating those spaces where we show that it is okay for us to be ourselves, and that being ourselves means there will be different viewpoints, that can be a way to deal with polarity and also the political feelings that are coming in. Talking about the factors as well, it's very important to be mindful of the fact that what is going on in the world, global events, national events, community events, they will impact us as we do the work that we do, any of us. Looking at the genocide, for instance, that is impacting people on a daily basis. It isn't something that we can just switch off for the 8 hours that we're going to be at work, and switching on our laptops, going into the office, for instance. We can't do that. It is part of who we are. It's part of how we see the world. So it has to be something that there is space for. There is also mindful discussion of the fact that there are things going on in the world. So let's be considerate, let's be empathic, care for each other, and have a culture of well-being where we can make space for the fact that we are feeling beings and that this is part of who we are, and it will come into the workforce. There's no way to completely get it out of the workplace unless we remove all the humans. It's as simple as that. So in my experience, for sure, creating spaces for dialogue and having that sense of everybody is welcome, there will be different views and there will be ground rules. So again, no swearing, no shouting, no punching, no deliberately inciting hatred, anything like that. Absolutely not. But there is a space for discussion. We can enable that. And that is part of how we care for each other and how we try to understand different perspectives and bridge those gaps. And also build trust between all of us. Okay, thank you. Seeing some more of your comments and thoughts coming in. So thank you for airing these. Really great to hear your responses in real time. I love this interactive element of it. Please continue to share your thoughts and comments as they come through, and any more questions that you have while we round up. Okay, so now one more question that I had that has been sent to me beforehand. How do you feel about the future of the DEI industry? And do you see that it has a future? I was very happy to, I think this one, as you can see, it made me smile when it came in. I was like, I like this question. Very, very interesting. And I think it's very necessary to address this and talk about this. Do I see that it has a future? How do I feel about the future? I am optimistic about the future. I think for those of you who know me already, and I think also why I do the work that I do, I'm a very optimistic person. For better, for worse, I'm a very optimistic person. So I do feel optimistic about the future of the industry. But I wouldn't say it's just blind optimism, not based on anything that's fueling how I feel about this. It comes back to what I've been saying before, the fundamental nature of DE&I work, the fact that it links to who we are as people and is so important for us. Things like belonging, it's not just a nice to have, it cuts to the core of who we are, how we are social creatures, and how we need to be acknowledged and feel certain things in order to have well-being in our professional and personal lives. So we will always need initiatives like this that aim to have more equal societies, that aim to have social justice, that aim to have inclusion and belonging, and to celebrate the diversity, acknowledge and celebrate the diversity that all of us bring, the uniqueness. That is definitely something that will always be there. So I'm optimistic because I don't see that there will ever not be a need for this. Again, unless human beings fundamentally change or we get rid of all the humans, we will always have a need for this. Do I see a future for the industry? Yes, but I also feel that the industry does need to evolve. I've been talking earlier about some of the evolutions I've been seeing and the current trends on the landscape. I think any industry needs to look at itself periodically, make sure that it is actually serving the needs of the communities and the people that it is aiming to provide value for. And so it will always be an evolution. The DE&I of 2 years ago is not necessarily the DE&I work we're doing today. 2 years from now, even next year, it will look slightly different. I think that is very natural, and that's something that is necessary. And yeah, it's a natural evolution process that needs to happen. So I do see that there is a future because it is so important to us as societies and to our objectives as well as organizations. But do I think that we will be doing the exact same thing right now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? No. And I'm glad, because if we were doing the exact same thing, there will be a problem, because change is always present. It's what do they say? It's like the one thing you can rely on in life. Change will always be there. And so the industry needs to evolve and change as well to make sure that it is still doing what it needs to do and meeting those needs. So yeah, optimistic, and also looking forward to seeing how it continues to evolve and how we all continue to collaborate together to create that evolution and make sure that people get what they need from the work that we are doing. Okay, just looking through at the comments. Again, thanks a lot for your participation. It's really great to hear about all of your comments, to see your questions. I don't see any more questions coming through for now, so I think I'll probably round up at this point. Of course, this is not where the conversation ends, so we're going to wrap up quite soon for the webinar, but let's keep the conversation going. I'll be doing more events coming up, and also I have the newsletter that comes out every month. I'll flash up a link so you can see how to find that. I have the newsletter, so you're always welcome to carry on this conversation. I always ask for people to reply to that, tell me their thoughts, see what's going on. Let's keep this conversation going. If additional questions come up that you would like to have answered, feel free to send me a message, to comment on one of my posts, to send me an email, and I'll be very happy, of course, to keep this conversation going, to keep chatting and collaborating. Again, to have that open dialogue and keep us all connected. But I wanted to round up today just sharing a little bit about what is next from Kazuri Consulting and from me. So I talked a little bit about my book, Women, Intersectionality and Europe, which came out in April earlier this year. And it's been a lovely journey so far, promoting the book, talking to lots of different people in person and online events, lots of really, really interesting conversations. And I think a lot of joy for me in seeing that there's been such a lovely, warm reception to the fact that I'm bringing these European data insights, telling women's stories and providing clues or building blocks for inclusive communities here in Europe based on all this information and what we can do with this great, rich complexity around diversity in Europe. So since then, it's been on sale since April, but I've been signing up with additional distribution partners over the summer. So now Women, Intersectionality in Europe is very, very widely available through multiple distribution channels, both physical bookstores as well as online retailers. And I'm also currently recording the audiobook. So watch the space. That is currently going on. And as soon as I have more news about that, I will be sharing that. So I'm working hard to have different formats. So it's already paperback and ebook, going to have the audiobook, again, looking at accessibility and getting as many of us engaged and able to participate in the conversation as possible. So I'm going to put on the screen my website. There we go, kazuriconsulting.com. There is information there about the book if you'd like to find out more about what is in it, who the target audience is, see some reader reviews, etc., as well as links to the points of purchase. So that is all on my website. Also, you can sign up there for my newsletter and, of course, find out more about the other types of work that I do and find all that information there. And for those of you who have been following Kazuri Consulting and my work for a while, you'll know that I work with organizations to look at systemic changes, to embed inclusion into what they are doing, to empower diverse talent, to achieve their strategic objectives, and to embed systemic change. And I'm very excited to announce that there are some changes and some broadening to the work that I'm going to be doing, which I'll be talking more about very soon. So while I will still be doing this and looking at the systemic level, then based on what I am seeing, and also looking at my own background and my own interests around looking at how we bring together cultural appreciation and cultural awareness as a key enabler for inclusion, then I will soon be launching specific offerings focused on inclusive behaviors and also navigating cross-cultural conflict. So looking at the theory and moving beyond that to what do we do in teams to help us create more collaborative, inclusive spaces by design and navigate bumps in the road when it comes to conflict that arises, enabling people to work better together and also helping people in teams to set the intentions and measure the work that they are doing in terms of inclusion and inclusive outcomes. So that is one new offering that I'll be bringing out very soon. Another one is looking at managers and understanding some of the difficulties, the challenges that come with managing cross-cultural teams, dealing with some of the international and local dynamics, and making sure that managers are equipped to create the tone for the teams they want to have around inclusion and navigating cross-cultural conflict, etc. So looking at offerings for managers and team leaders, both present and future leaders, helping to build those skills and create the dynamics that we want to have. So one for teams and one for present and future leaders. I'll be sharing more information about this soon, so watch this space. And also, if you have a specific question about these new offerings and the work that I'll be doing, looking at, again, still focusing on systemic changes in organizations, but then looking also at how to empower managers and looking at team dynamics, feel free to reach out to me and very happy to have a discussion and to share more about this. Okay. So the time always goes by very, very quickly. We're already at 57 minutes past the hour, and it's been a real thrill just sharing these insights with you. Thank you so much for your comments, your insights coming through. And I'm not seeing any more comments or questions coming through at the moment, just highlighting some others that came through. Thank you for these. So it looks like perhaps this is a good moment to take a pause for today. And as I said, the conversation continues. This is not the end. So feel free to reach out to me via your preferred channel. Very happy to have a discussion and answer any more questions that come up. But for today, thank you very much for joining and looking forward to seeing you at another Kazuri event soon.